Trust me, you won't forget this one. Because this story didn't start with love, or money, or even betrayal. It started with a single syringe, hidden under a silk pillow, in a penthouse suite that cost more per night than most people make in a month. A maid named Maria was just making the bed, like she had done for 12 years, when her fingers brushed against something cold and sharp. What she found didn't just expose one secret. It exposed a plan that had been building for months, right under the nose of a man who thought he had everything figured out. And by the end of this story, nobody in that room would ever trust each other the same way again. Hey everyone! Welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you belong to? Drop it in the comments, I read every single one. Today's story is one of those emotional, gripping tales about love, loyalty, and the secrets people hide behind closed doors, no matter how much money they have. It's about a billionaire, his glamorous fiancée, and the one woman nobody in that house ever really noticed, until the day she found something that changed everything. Stay with me until the end, because this story has a twist you will not see coming. The morning sun hadn't even finished climbing over the Manhattan skyline when Maria Delgado let herself into the penthouse on the 52nd floor, the way she had done nearly every morning for the past 12 years. She was 34 years old, with tired eyes that had seen more of this family's private moments than anyone else alive. She moved quietly through the marble hallway, past the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting, past the fresh flowers that were replaced every single day whether anyone noticed them or not, and into the master bedroom, where Julian Hart, 34 years old and one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country, still lay sleeping. Maria didn't wake him. She never did. That wasn't her job, and more than that, it wasn't her place. At least, that was what she had been told, more than once, by the woman who now shared this bed with him. Vanessa Cole was already up. 30 years old, dressed in a robe that probably cost more than Maria's monthly rent, standing by the window with her arms crossed, staring out at the city with an expression Maria couldn't quite read. She didn't turn around when Maria entered. She rarely did. Maria began her routine, smoothing the corners of the massive bed, fluffing the pillows, preparing the room the way she always had. And that was when her hand brushed against something hard beneath the pillow on Julian's side of the bed. At first, she thought it might be his phone, forgotten in his sleep. But when she lifted the pillow, her breath caught in her throat. A syringe. Small, clear, capped, resting against the silk sheets like it belonged there. For a moment, Maria simply stared at it, her mind racing through a dozen possibilities. Was Julian sick? Was this something medical he hadn't told anyone about? Or was it something else entirely, something far more dangerous? "Mr. Hart," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly as she reached for his shoulder. "Mr. Hart, wake up. You need to see this." Julian stirred, blinking against the morning light, confused at the urgency in Maria's voice. She had never woken him like this before. In 12 years, she had never once broken the unspoken rule of staying invisible, staying silent, staying in the background. "Maria, what's wrong?" She held up the pillow with trembling hands, revealing the syringe underneath. "I found this. Under your pillow." Julian sat up immediately, his sleepy confusion sharpening into something else, concern, maybe fear. He leaned forward and stared at the syringe like it was a foreign object he couldn't quite process. "That's not mine," he said slowly. I don't even know what that is." Behind them, Vanessa finally turned from the window. Her face, usually composed and camera-ready even at this hour, flickered with something Maria couldn't quite place. Surprise. Or something closer to panic, quickly buried beneath a practiced calm. "What's going on?" Vanessa asked, her voice smooth, almost too smooth. "Maria found a syringe under my pillow," Julian said, holding it up between two fingers like it might explode. "Do you know anything about this?" For just a fraction of a second, so brief that if you weren't watching closely you might have missed it, Vanessa's eyes darted toward the syringe, then toward Maria, then back to Julian. Her expression rearranged itself into concern, into confusion, into the perfect picture of a worried fiancé. "Of course not," she said, walking over and taking his hand. "Julian, I have no idea what that is. Maybe it's from the cleaning staff? Maybe someone left it by accident." Maria stood there, the empty pillow still in her hands, watching the exchange unfold. Something about the way Vanessa had looked at that syringe, just for a second, before she composed herself, didn't sit right. Maria had spent 12 years reading this family, reading the silences, the tension, the things people didn't say out loud. And right now, every instinct she had was telling her that something was very, very wrong. "I'll call the doctor," Julian said finally, setting the syringe carefully on the nightstand. "Maybe it's nothing. Maybe there's an explanation." But as he said it, his eyes drifted, just briefly, to Vanessa's face. And for the first time in the 2 years they had been together, Maria saw something flicker in Julian's expression that had never been there before. Doubt. Nobody in that room said another word for a long moment. The city outside kept moving, indifferent to the silence inside. But Maria knew, standing there with an empty pillow in her hands, that whatever was about to unfold in this penthouse was only just beginning, and she had a terrible feeling that she was about to become part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. Nobody tells you that loyalty can feel like a trap. Maria had learned that lesson slowly, over 12 years of working in this apartment, first for Julian's mother, Eleanor Hart, and now for Julian himself. She had been 22 years old when she first walked through these doors, a young immigrant from Guatemala with nothing but a work visa and a determination to build a life for her son back home. Eleanor Hart had been the one who gave her that chance. Eleanor had been kind in ways the rest of this world of money and marble rarely was. She remembered Maria's birthday, asked about her family, treated her like a person instead of furniture. When Eleanor passed away 6 years ago, Maria had almost quit. But Julian, then just 28 and suddenly thrust into control of his mother's empire, had asked her to stay. "You're the only piece of this house that still feels like home," he had told her. And so she stayed. Vanessa Cole had entered the picture 2 years ago, at a charity gala Julian's company sponsored. She was beautiful, ambitious, and, according to the tabloids, exactly the kind of woman a man like Julian Hart was supposed to end up with. Old money on her mother's side, though the family fortune had quietly dried up over the past decade, something Maria had overheard in a phone call Vanessa never realized she'd been careless with. From the beginning, Vanessa had made it clear that Maria's presence in the penthouse was tolerated, not welcomed. Small comments here and there. Requests delivered with a sharpness that didn't need to be there. A way of looking through Maria rather than at her. Maria had brushed it off for 2 years. Rich people were like that sometimes, she told herself. It wasn't personal. But over the past few months, something had shifted. Vanessa had become more secretive. Phone calls taken in other rooms, cut short the moment Maria entered. A locked drawer in the study that had never been locked before. Small orange pill bottles that appeared and disappeared from the bathroom cabinet, never with labels Maria could read clearly. And now, a syringe under Julian's pillow. After the doctor came and went that morning, running quick tests, finding nothing alarming in Julian's blood work, suggesting it might have simply been left behind by a home health aide who'd visited weeks earlier for a routine vitamin injection, the household seemed to exhale. Julian accepted the explanation. Mostly. Vanessa certainly did, wrapping her arms around him with visible relief. But Maria didn't believe it. Not entirely. She kept thinking about that flicker in Vanessa's eyes. The panic, quickly smoothed over. The speed with which she had offered an explanation before anyone had even asked for one. That evening, as Maria prepared to leave for the day, she passed by the study and noticed the door slightly ajar. Vanessa was inside, speaking quietly into her phone, her back turned toward the door. "No, it has to look natural. He can't suspect anything," Maria heard, just a fragment, just enough to make her stop in her tracks. "I told you, just a little more time." The maid found it, but Julian believed the doctor. "We're fine." Maria's blood ran cold. She stood frozen in the hallway, her hand still resting on the handle of her cleaning cart, straining to hear more. But Vanessa's voice dropped lower, and after a few seconds, Maria heard footsteps approaching the door. She moved quickly, pretending to busy herself with the hallway table, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it could be heard through her chest. Vanessa stepped out of the study, phone now tucked away, her expression perfectly composed once again. "Maria," she said coolly, "aren't you finished for the day?" "Yes, just leaving now." Vanessa's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. "Good. I don't like people lingering where they don't need to be." Maria nodded and gathered her things, forcing her hands to stay steady, forcing her face to stay calm. But inside, her mind was racing. He can't suspect anything. The maid found it, but Julian believed the doctor. "We're fine. Whatever was happening in this penthouse, it was no accident." And whatever Vanessa Cole was planning, Maria had just become an obstacle standing in her way. She rode the elevator down in silence, her reflection staring back at her in the polished doors, and for the first time in 12 years of loyal, quiet service, Maria understood that silence was no longer an option. Someone she cared about was in danger, and she was the only one who knew it. Maria didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in her small apartment in Queens, the sound of her son's soft breathing from the next room the only thing keeping her grounded, replaying Vanessa's phone call over and over in her mind. "He can't suspect anything. We're fine. Fine. What did that even mean? Fine for who?" By morning, Maria had made a decision. She couldn't go to Julian directly, not yet. She had no proof, only a fragment of an overheard conversation that Vanessa could easily explain away, and Maria knew exactly how these things worked. She was the maid. Vanessa was the fiancée. If it came down to her word against Vanessa's, Maria already knew who Julian would be inclined to believe, no matter how much he trusted her. She needed proof. Real proof. Over the following week, Maria began paying closer attention than she ever had before. She noticed things she had dismissed as unimportant. The way Vanessa insisted on making Julian's tea herself every evening, waving off the household staff who usually handled it. The way Julian had seemed unusually tired and foggy some mornings, forgetting small details, struggling to focus during video calls Maria could overhear from the hallway. Something deeply unusual for a man known throughout his industry for his sharp, relentless mind. And then there was the locked drawer. On a Thursday afternoon, when Vanessa left for a hair appointment and Julian was at his downtown office, Maria found herself standing in the study, staring at that drawer. Her heart pounded with the weight of what she was about to do. In 12 years, she had never once gone through anything that wasn't hers to touch. But this didn't feel like snooping anymore. This felt like protecting someone she cared about. She found a small hairpin in her pocket, an old trick her grandmother had taught her back home, and after several tense minutes, the lock gave way. Inside, she found a manila folder. Bank statements showing Vanessa's accounts, drained far lower than the lifestyle she projected. A stack of overdue notices from a luxury real estate firm. Properties Vanessa had apparently purchased on credit, now facing foreclosure. And beneath all of that, a single folded document that made Maria's stomach drop. It was a durable power of attorney form. Julian's name was printed at the top. The document would grant Vanessa full legal authority over his medical and financial decisions, if he were deemed mentally incapacitated. A section near the bottom was already filled in with a doctor's name Maria didn't recognize. Dr. Aaron Voss. Maria's hands trembled as she photographed each page with her phone, her breath shallow, every creak of the apartment sending a jolt of fear through her chest. She had barely finished when she heard the front door open. Maria froze, shoving the folder back into the drawer, fumbling to relock it with the hairpin, her fingers slick with sweat. She managed to close it just as footsteps approached the study door. It wasn't Vanessa. It was Emma, Julian's younger sister, 26 years old and one of the few people in this family Maria trusted completely. "Maria, what are you doing in here?" Emma asked, tilting her head with genuine confusion rather than suspicion. For a long moment, Maria considered lying. But something in her told her this was the moment she needed an ally, someone who wasn't just staff, someone who could actually be heard. "Emma," she said quietly, closing the study door behind them. "I need to show you something. And I need you to believe me, even though it's going to sound impossible." Emma's expression shifted from confusion to concern as Maria pulled out her phone, hands still shaking, and began scrolling through the photographs. "That syringe under Julian's pillow," Maria said. "It wasn't an accident. I think Vanessa has been planning something for months. And I think we're running out of time to stop her." Emma's face went pale as she looked at the power of attorney document glowing on Maria's phone screen. Vanessa's name listed as the sole decision-maker, Dr. Voss's signature already prepared and waiting. "Oh my God," Emma whispered. "She's trying to take everything." The truth unraveled slowly, piece by piece, over the following days, as Maria and Emma quietly worked together to understand exactly what they were dealing with. Dr. Aaron Voss, it turned out, was not affiliated with any hospital Julian had ever used. A quick search revealed a physician whose medical license had been suspended 18 months earlier following an investigation into questionable prescription practices. A man willing to sign whatever document was placed in front of him for the right price. Emma, using her position within the family more freely than Maria ever could, discreetly reached out to a private investigator her late mother had once used to vet business partners. Within a few days, a picture began to form that was far darker than either of them had imagined. Vanessa Cole's family fortune, once substantial, had collapsed nearly 5 years earlier due to a series of failed investments by her father. What the public still believed to be old money was, in reality, a carefully maintained illusion. Credit lines, borrowed jewelry, a lifestyle built on the assumption that marrying into the Hart fortune would eventually solve everything. But Vanessa hadn't been willing to simply wait for a wedding. According to the investigators' findings, she had been in regular contact with Dr. Voss for months, along with a man named Richard Ellery, a former business associate of Julian's who had lost a bitter boardroom battle for control of a subsidiary company nearly 2 years earlier and had never forgiven him for it. Together, it appeared, they had built a plan. Small doses of a sedative, discreetly added to Julian's evening tea, just enough to cause the fogginess and forgetfulness Maria had noticed, gradually building a medical case for cognitive decline. A staged medical evaluation from a compromised doctor. Assigned power of attorney. And control of the company, the fortune, the empire Eleanor Hart had spent her life building, quietly transferred into Vanessa's hands, with Richard Ellery waiting in the wings to advise her on business decisions once the ink was dry. The syringe under the pillow had likely been an accident, a moment of carelessness, perhaps Vanessa preparing a dose and being interrupted, hiding it in the fastest place she could reach before Julian woke. "We have to tell him," Emma said one evening, pacing the length of Maria's small apartment after insisting on driving out to Queens herself so they could talk without any risk of being overheard. "Maria, we have to tell my brother right now." "And say what?" Maria asked, her voice tight with frustration and fear. "That I broke into a locked drawer. That I'm accusing his fiancée of drugging him based on a phone call I overheard and some documents. Emma, he loves her. He's not going to believe us over her, not without something undeniable." Emma sank into a chair, running her hands through her hair. "So what do we do?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photograph still saved on her phone, at Julian's name printed beside a stranger's signature, at a plan built to unravel everything he had spent his life building. "We get proof he can't deny," Maria finally said. "Real proof. Something he sees with his own eyes." It was a dangerous decision, and Maria knew it. If Vanessa discovered what they were doing before they had enough evidence, there was no telling what she might do. Accelerate the plan, destroy the evidence, or worse, find a way to remove Maria from the household entirely before she could say another word. But Maria thought of Eleanor Hart, the woman who had given her a chance when no one else would, who had trusted her enough to bring her into this family's most private moments. And she thought of Julian, sitting in that bed, confused and unknowingly drugged in his own home by the woman he was about to marry. She hadn't asked for any of this. 12 years of quiet, invisible service, and now she was the only thing standing between Julian Hart and losing everything he had. "I'm scared," Maria admitted quietly. "But I'm not going to just stand back and watch this happen to him." Emma reached across the table and took Maria's hand. "Then we do this together. Whatever it takes." Outside, the city lights flickered on across the Queen's skyline, and somewhere across that same sky, in a penthouse 52 floors above the ground, Vanessa Cole was already preparing the tea for that evening, unaware that the two women she had underestimated most were about to bring her entire plan crashing down around her. The following 2 weeks were the longest of Maria's life. She moved through her daily routine in the penthouse with a forced calm that felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. Every glance from Vanessa felt loaded with suspicion. Every closed door felt like it might be hiding another piece of the plan. Maria smiled, cleaned, cooked, and served, all while carrying the terrible weight of what she knew. Emma, meanwhile, worked to install a small hidden camera in the study, a birthday gift for Julian, she claimed, part of a home security upgrade she insisted the penthouse desperately needed after a break-in scare in a neighboring building. Julian, distracted by an upcoming merger deal and still not entirely himself, agreed without much resistance. But security cameras alone wouldn't be enough. They needed to catch Vanessa in the act, or capture a conversation that left no room for doubt. The opportunity, and the danger, came on a Tuesday evening when Julian left for a late business dinner and Vanessa, believing herself alone in the penthouse aside from the help, made a phone call from the living room instead of the study. Maria, pretending to fold laundry in the adjoining room, caught fragments of the conversation, her phone recording quietly from her apron pocket. "The appointment with Voss is set for Friday," Vanessa said, her voice sharper than Maria had ever heard it. "Richard, I need this done before the engagement party. Once we're married, it's harder to challenge anything I do on his behalf. But if we get the power of attorney signed before the wedding, there's no contest possible. It's clean." A pause, then a short, cold laugh. "No, he still has no idea. He thinks he's just stressed. Exhausted from work. God, it's almost too easy." Maria's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the shirt she was folding. She forced herself to stay still, stay quiet, stay invisible. The very skill that had defined her entire career in this house, now the only thing protecting her. When Vanessa finally ended the call and left the room, Maria allowed herself to breathe again, checking with shaking hands that the recording had captured everything clearly. It had. Every word. But her relief was short-lived. 2 days later, Vanessa cornered her in the kitchen, her expression cold in a way Maria had never seen before. "You've been acting strange lately, Maria," Vanessa said, circling slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "Spending a lot of time with Emma. Lots of whispered conversations. Should I be worried about something?" "No," Maria said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear pounding through her chest. "Just helping with wedding planning." Vanessa's eyes narrowed, studying Maria's face for any crack in her composure. "I hope that's all it is. Because I'd hate for something to happen to your position here. 12 years is a long time to build a life around one job, isn't it? Must be terrible to lose it all." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable and deliberate. Maria held her gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to let Vanessa see just how deeply the words had landed. "I understand, she said quietly. "I'm just here to do my job." Vanessa smiled, cold and satisfied, and walked away. But Maria's heart was racing long after she left the room. Vanessa suspected something. And if she accelerated her plan, moved the appointment with Dr. Voss earlier, found a way to push through the power of attorney before the party, everything Maria and Emma had worked for could collapse before they had the chance to stop it. That night, Maria sat with Emma in her small apartment, the recorded phone call playing quietly between them, Julian's future hanging in the balance of a decision they could no longer delay. "She knows something's wrong," Maria said. "We don't have much time left." Emma stared at her phone, scrolling through the engagement party details Vanessa had been finalizing. A lavish event just 6 days away, at the Hart family's private estate, where 200 guests, business partners, and members of the press would be watching. Then we do it there, Emma said slowly, an idea forming in her eyes. In front of everyone. Where she can't spin it. Where she can't threaten anyone into silence. Maria felt a chill run through her, not from fear this time, but from resolve. Are you sure your brother can handle that? Finding out like that, in front of the entire world. Emma's expression hardened with a determination that reminded Maria so much of Eleanor Hart it nearly took her breath away. I'd rather he hear the truth in front of 200 people than sign his entire life away to a woman who never loved him at all. The 6 days leading up to the engagement party passed in a blur of careful planning and quiet terror. Maria and Emma knew they needed more than just the recorded phone call. Vanessa was clever enough to claim it had been taken out of context, edited, misunderstood. They needed something undeniable, a moment where Julian himself could see the truth unfold with his own eyes. Emma reached out to the private investigator once more, this time requesting something far riskier. Documentation of Dr. Voss's actual movements, proof that he had visited the penthouse under a false name, evidence tying him directly to Richard Ellery. It took 4 days of careful, quiet work, but the investigator delivered. Photographs of Dr. Voss entering the building through a service elevator on 2 separate occasions, security footage obtained through a contact in the building's management, timestamps that matched perfectly with the mornings Julian had woken feeling unusually foggy and disoriented. Maria, meanwhile, made a discovery of her own. While preparing the guest bathroom near the study for the party's final walkthrough, she noticed a small vial tucked behind a decorative box on Vanessa's vanity, nearly identical to the one that had been photographed weeks earlier during the investigators' research into Dr. Voss's known prescriptions. With trembling hands, she photographed it exactly where it sat, careful not to disturb its position, then quietly stepped back before anyone could notice her there. Every piece was falling into place. But so was the danger. 2 nights before the party, Maria was summoned unexpectedly to the study, where Vanessa sat waiting, a single sheet of paper on the desk in front of her. I've decided we don't need you at the party, Vanessa said coolly, sliding the paper forward. Termination paperwork. Effective the morning after. I'll make sure you're compensated fairly for your years of service, of course. But I think it's time for a change around here, don't you? Maria's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. Of course, whatever you think is best. She left the study that evening with her hands still shaking, the weight of what was coming pressing down on her chest. If she was let go before the party, everything they had worked for could unravel. She needed to be there. She needed to be the one to hand Julian the truth. That night, Maria called Emma in a panic. She's firing me. Effective right after the party. If I'm not there. You'll be there, Emma said firmly. I'll make sure of it. As my personal guest. She can't stop you from attending as my invited guest. Not without raising exactly the kind of questions she's trying to avoid. The morning of the party arrived with a strange, heavy stillness, like the entire city was holding its breath alongside Maria. She dressed carefully in a modest navy dress Emma had insisted on buying for her, the small flash drive containing every recording, every photograph, every piece of evidence they had gathered, tucked securely into her handbag. Julian, when she saw him briefly that afternoon during final preparations, looked exhausted in a way that broke her heart. Dark circles under his eyes. A distracted, foggy quality to his movements that had become almost constant over the past 2 weeks. He smiled at her kindly, the way he always had. You look nice, Maria, he said. Excited for tonight. Maria forced a smile, her chest tightening with everything she couldn't yet say. Very excited, Mr. Hart. It's going to be a night to remember. If only he knew how true those words really were. By early evening, the Hart family's private estate had transformed into something out of a magazine spread, string lights woven through ancient oak trees, A live orchestra tuning their instruments on a marble terrace overlooking the water, 200 of the city's most powerful and prominent guests arriving in a steady stream of designer gowns and tailored suits. Vanessa moved through the crowd like she had already won, radiant in a custom gown, greeting guests with the practiced warmth of a woman who believed, by tomorrow, all of this would belong entirely to her. Maria stood near the edge of the terrace, watching her, the flash drive heavy in her handbag, her heart pounding with a fear she had never known before. Tonight, everything would change. One way or another. The evening unfolded exactly as Vanessa had planned, right up until the moment it didn't. Julian stood at the center of the terrace as the sun began to set, champagne glass in hand, delivering a warm, if slightly unfocused, toast to the crowd of friends, family, and business associates who had gathered to celebrate his engagement. Maria watched from a distance, standing near Emma, her hands clasped tightly together to keep them from shaking. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Julian said, his voice carrying across the terrace, though Maria noticed the slight hesitation in his words, the way he seemed to search for his thoughts more than usual. "My mother always told me that love finds you when you least expect it. And I think she would have loved Vanessa." The crowd applauded warmly. Vanessa stood beside him, glowing, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her eyes briefly flicking toward the terrace entrance, where Dr. Voss had just arrived, dressed in an expensive suit, carrying a leather medical bag that looked almost like an accessory rather than the tool of manipulation Maria knew it truly was. "There's someone I'd like Julian to meet," Vanessa announced smoothly to the small circle of guests nearby, guiding Julian gently toward Voss. "A specialist. He's been wonderful, helping monitor your stress levels these past few months. I think it would be good for you to have a quick check-in tonight, just to put my mind at ease." Emma's hand found Maria's arm, gripping tightly. "She's doing it now," Emma whispered. "Right now, in front of everyone, so it looks completely normal." Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. If Voss got Julian alone, even for a few minutes, there was no telling what might happen. Another injection, another signature obtained under the guise of a routine medical evaluation, another piece of the plan quietly slotted into place while 200 unsuspecting guests sipped champagne just feet away. "We have to move now," Maria said. Emma nodded, already pulling out her phone, connecting it to the small speaker system Julian's event planner had set up near the terrace's main stage for the evening's toasts and speeches. Maria had memorized the plan they'd rehearsed a dozen times over the past 2 days, but her hands still trembled as she made her way toward the small stage area, weaving through clusters of guests who had no idea what was about to unfold. Vanessa was gently steering Julian toward a quiet corner of the terrace, Dr. Voss following closely behind with his leather bag, when Maria reached the small stage. She caught Emma's eye across the crowd. Emma gave a small, steady nod. Maria took a breath, stepping toward the microphone that had been used only minutes earlier for Julian's toast, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone around her could hear it. "Excuse me," Maria said, her voice trembling slightly as it carried across the terrace through the speaker system, cutting through the quiet murmur of conversation and clinking glasses. Every head turned. "I'm sorry to interrupt. But before this evening goes any further, there's something everyone here deserves to know. Especially you, Mr. Hart." Vanessa's head snapped toward the stage, her face draining of color the moment she saw Maria standing there, phone in hand, the flash drive already connected to Emma's laptop resting on a nearby table. "Maria, what are you doing?" Vanessa said, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes as she started toward the stage. "This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," Maria said, her voice growing steadier with every word. 12 years of quiet invisibility finally breaking into something she never thought she'd have the courage to do. Because in about 30 seconds, Dr. Voss over there was going to give Julian another injection. Just like the one I found under his pillow 3 weeks ago. Gasps rippled across the terrace. Julian turned slowly, his foggy expression sharpening into something like dawning horror as he looked between Maria, Vanessa, and the doctor standing frozen beside him, medical bag still in hand. For a long, terrible moment, Nobody moved. Julian stood frozen between Vanessa and Dr. Voss, his mind visibly struggling through the fog that had clouded his thoughts for weeks, trying to make sense of what Maria had just said in front of 200 stunned guests. "Maria, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice unsteady. Vanessa recovered quickly, turning to the crowd with a look of practiced concern. "I'm so sorry, everyone. Maria has clearly had some kind of breakdown. I think the pressure of the wedding preparations." "I have proof," Maria said, cutting through Vanessa's words, nodding toward Emma, who quickly connected her laptop to the large display screen that had been set up earlier for the evening slideshow of Julian and Vanessa's photos together. The recorded phone call began to play, Vanessa's voice filling the terrace, clear and unmistakable. "The appointment with Voss is set for Friday. Richard, I need this done before the engagement party." The color drained from Vanessa's face as her own words echoed across the stunned crowd. Guests exchanged horrified glances, phones quietly lowering, whispers rippling through the audience like a wave. "Turn that off," Vanessa snapped, but her voice cracked, all pretense of composure crumbling. That's edited. That's not real." "Then explain this," Emma said, stepping forward and pulling up the photographs the investigator had gathered. Dr. Voss entering the building through the service elevator, timestamps matching perfectly with Julian's worst mornings, alongside images of the vial Maria had found hidden in Vanessa's vanity, and finally, the power of attorney document itself, Julian's name printed clearly at the top. Dr. Voss's signature already prepared beside a blank line waiting for Julian's own. Julian stared at the screen, his expression shifting through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a devastating clarity that seemed to cut through the fog all at once. He looked down at the champagne glass in his hand, the same glass Vanessa had personally handed him just an hour earlier, and slowly set it down on a nearby table as though it had suddenly become something dangerous. "Julian, please," Vanessa said, her voice breaking as she reached for his arm. "I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like." "Don't touch me," Julian said quietly, stepping back from her, his voice trembling with a mixture of heartbreak and fury. "You've been drugging me. In my own home. While I trusted you completely." Dr. Voss, seeing the situation collapsing around him, attempted to slip quietly toward the terrace exit, his medical bag clutched tightly to his chest. But security, alerted quietly by Emma earlier that evening as a precaution, intercepted him before he could disappear into the crowd. "You knew," Julian said, turning to Vanessa, his voice barely above a whisper now, though the silence of the shocked terrace carried it to every corner. "This whole time. Everything. Our engagement. Our future. It was never real, was it?" Vanessa's carefully constructed composure finally shattered completely, tears streaming down her face, though whether from genuine remorse or the crushing weight of exposure, Maria couldn't tell, and honestly, it no longer mattered. "I needed the money, Julian," she said, her voice raw. "You don't understand what it's like, watching everything you thought you had just disappear. Richard said it would be easy. He said no one would ever know." At the mention of his name, several guests turned toward the terrace entrance, where Richard Ellery had been standing quietly near the bar, watching the unraveling scene with growing panic. Realizing he had been named in front of dozens of witnesses, including several members of Julian's board of directors who happened to be in attendance, Richard turned and hurried toward the exit, but it was already far too late. The damage, and the truth, had been laid bare for everyone to see. The engagement party that was supposed to celebrate a wedding instead became the night everything fell apart, and, in its own strange way, the night everything finally came together. Security escorted Dr. Voss and Richard Ellery from the estate as guests watched in stunned silence, phones now openly recording the unfolding scandal that would be splashed across gossip columns and business news outlets by morning. Vanessa remained on the terrace, sobbing, surrounded by the wreckage of a plan that had taken months to build and less than 10 minutes to destroy. Julian stood motionless for a long time, staring at the ring still on Vanessa's finger, the ring his mother had once worn, the ring he had chosen specifically because it reminded him of the woman who had raised him to believe in loyalty above everything else. "Take it off," he said quietly. Please. Vanessa, trembling, slid the ring from her finger and placed it in his open palm, unable to meet his eyes. Without another word, Julian turned and walked toward the edge of the terrace, staring out at the water, his shoulders heavy with a betrayal Maria couldn't begin to imagine. It was Maria who finally approached him, her heart pounding with uncertainty, unsure whether he would be angry that she had waited so long or grateful that she had acted at all. "Mr. Hart," she said softly, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how else to protect you." Julian turned to face her, and for a moment, Maria braced herself for anger, for questions about why she hadn't come to him the very first day, why she had waited, why she had gone behind his back instead of trusting him with the truth from the beginning. Instead, his eyes filled with tears, and he did something Maria never expected. He reached out and took both her hands in his, holding them firmly. "You saved my life tonight," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just my company. Not just my fortune. My life. If you hadn't found that syringe, if you hadn't kept pushing even when I refused to see it. Maria, I don't know what would have happened to me." "I was scared," Maria admitted, tears finally slipping down her own cheeks after weeks of holding everything together. "I was scared no one would believe me. That I'd lose my job. That I'd lose everything I've built here for my son." "You should have never had to be scared of that," Julian said firmly. "Not after everything you've done for this family. Not after everything my mother believed about you." Emma joined them then, wrapping an arm around Maria's shoulders, the three of them standing together at the edge of the terrace while the remaining guests slowly began to disperse, whispering amongst themselves about the scandal that would dominate conversation across the city for weeks to come. "What happens now?" Maria asked quietly, looking between Julian and Emma. Julian wiped his eyes and managed a small, exhausted smile. "Now, we start over. Carefully. Honestly. And you, Maria, you're never going anywhere. Not after this. Not ever." 3 months later, the penthouse on the 52nd floor felt different. The marble hallways were the same. The floor-to-ceiling windows still framed the same breathtaking skyline. But something in the air had shifted, lighter, somehow, like a weight that had been pressing down on the entire household for months had finally been lifted. Vanessa Cole's story had made headlines for weeks, her carefully built public image collapsing entirely once the full extent of the conspiracy came to light. Dr. Voss lost his remaining medical credentials and faced serious legal consequences, while Richard Ellery's business reputation crumbled just as quickly, his attempted hostile takeover of Hart Industries becoming a cautionary tale whispered about in boardrooms across the city. Julian, for his part, had spent the months since the party slowly rebuilding. Not just his company, which had weathered the scandal better than anyone expected thanks to swift, transparent action, but himself. He had gone through a full medical evaluation with doctors he trusted completely, confirming what Maria had already suspected. Months of careful, deliberate sedation, now finally out of his system, the fog finally lifting from his mind for good. But the most significant change in the household had little to do with lawyers or headlines or company statements. Maria Delgado no longer worked as the household maid. Julian had insisted, in the weeks following the party, on properly recognizing what she had done for him, not with a simple raise or a bonus, but with something far more meaningful. He had established a scholarship fund in his mother's name, and asked Maria, the woman who had understood Eleanor Hart's values of loyalty and integrity better than almost anyone, to help oversee it. Alongside that, he ensured her son's education, from that point forward, was fully secured, and offered Maria a permanent place within his family's charitable foundation. Not as staff, but as someone whose judgment and character he trusted completely. "You spent 12 years taking care of this family without ever asking for anything in return," Julian told her, during a quiet conversation in his office one afternoon. "It's time someone took care of you." Maria had cried that day, overwhelmed by a kindness she had never expected, still hardly able to believe that a single syringe found beneath a pillow had led to a transformation this profound in her own life. Looking back on everything now, Maria often thought about how close she had come to staying silent, to convincing herself it wasn't her place, to letting fear keep her from speaking up. But she had learned something that morning, and in the weeks that followed, that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Sometimes the people who see the most are the ones the world overlooks the most easily. And sometimes, real loyalty isn't about staying quiet and invisible, it's about having the courage to speak up, even when your voice shakes, even when you're terrified of losing everything, because someone else's safety matters more than your own comfort. Julian never remarried in a rush after that. He took his time healing, surrounded by people who had proven, in the hardest way possible, exactly who truly cared about him. And every single morning, when Maria walked through the penthouse doors, no longer to clean, but simply to visit, to check in on the family that had become her own, Julian would greet her with the same words. "Morning, Maria. Thank you for staying." If this story moved you tonight, that means it did exactly what it was meant to do. Loyalty, real loyalty, doesn't always come from the people closest to the spotlight. Sometimes it comes quietly, from the corner of the room, from someone who was never given enough credit until the moment truly mattered. If you believe that too, hit that like button right now, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. And if this touched your heart even a little, share it with someone you love, because stories like Maria's remind us that the truth always finds its way to the light, eventually. Thank you for watching until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.